Good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all. I hope you all managed to get a little bit of a break over the Christmas and New Year holiday. And welcome to January 2021. It doesn't seem different from 2020. So just a reminder for everybody.
Has joined the meeting.
I think that's Karen on the phone as well. This is being recorded and is currently live streamed on YouTube. Could I ask everybody to keep their cameras on so that I can see faces, blank screen? It does make my life slightly easier. And please put your hand up, wave at me if you want to speak, just to make life slightly easier to control. Or if you are able to use the hands up function, that's fine as well. So we can get going for this afternoon. I haven't got any, I don't think I did any chair's action in December. Apologies for absence. We've got apologies from Jill Jones from Healthwatch Suffolk, LMC, Tracy Williams, Jason Hollingridge. I think those are the only apologies I've got, unless I've missed anything. Nobody's Sadie?
Mark Burgess is going to be arriving a few minutes late.
That's fine. We will see him when we see him. I'm going to also to just move around the agenda items slightly just to accommodate various officers who's been pulled into different directions for meetings as well. So I'm planning to move the finance item number 7 up to before we do the minutes so that we can let Emma do her presentation, and then we'll go back to minutes on item 4. Is that okay, Emma?
That's really appreciated. Thank you very much, Chair.
Right, before we move on, we've got the declarations of interest. The declaration of interest is included in the papers. They have been updated to, I think, include most people's registered GP practice. Please can you check that the register is correct, and if it isn't, please let Sarah know so that it can be updated with Martin in the governance team. Are there any other declarations of interest on the agenda item this afternoon? Karen?
Doris, I will leave for part 2 because I'm conflicted, but Tracy Rogers will attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, so if there's no other declarations of interest, I will move to the finance report, item 7, and then I'll come back to the minutes. Emma, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So if I can take the committee to Schedule 2, please, overall position. If I'd just take you through the key messages of taking the paper as read. So we have a full year primary care directorate budget of 410 million, and our forecast is going to show an underspend of 1.4 million, delivering a spend of 409 million. The 1.4 million is coming from 2 areas, principally some non-recurrent benefits within our delegated primary care. So this is relating to prior year expenditure that has materialised less in this financial year than what we previously provided for it. And then some further benefits which actually are recurrent nature, which relate to Legacy West Norfolk and the treatment of treatment rooms actually in our locally enhanced services. So the position at the moment, year to date, on plan, but certainly a favourable position in terms of our forecast outturn. We are expecting an improved favourable position of forecast outturn as we move into the month 9 accounts, because the papers presented to the committee are based on month 8, i.e. November. So we're expecting and we are looking to crystallise some further prior year benefits, which will take that mitigation to a higher position. That said, in the paper, it's talked about existing financial risk around our GP prescribing, and as at the November position, we were broadly on plan with just 100,000 over. As we've moved into the month 9 position, this has really increased. We're certainly looking at a position now that's overspent in excess of £1 million. And that comes on the back of increased prescribing drugs and pressures. Obviously, flu costs are coming through. We look to recover those fully where we can. But we're also seeing an enhanced usage of antidepressants, anti-anxiety type drugs. And those things are certainly, as a result of COVID, changing the profile and the nature of the spend that we're seeing within GP prescribing. Certainly within delegated primary care, as I said, we are fine. We've got the mitigations, and I'm expecting that mitigation to grow. So overall, at the moment, to conclude, on plan year to date, 1.4 million mitigation secured at month 8, expecting that to grow, particularly from primary care, delegated primary care, as we move into month 9. The second schedule, if I may, just to take you to, is the schedule 4 for COVID costs. What that does at the top of the table is continue to present to the committee the COVID costs, principally around hospital discharge programmes and some of obviously primary care colleagues. What it doesn't at the moment is include any costs as a rate of COVID vaccinations. So as we move forward, that table will continue to grow and will actually be updated when we move looking to December's position for a full year forecast and not just that of the year to date. They are the key messages to share to the committee. I'm happy to take any questions. Please appreciate I may need to take some away with me, just giving me a short notice for joining you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Are there any questions from Emma from anybody? No. Just on the vaccine, the COVID vaccine, that obviously there's additional costs. Is that, are we getting an additional allocation from central, or is that supposed to be covered under the COVID expenditure allocation?
So unfortunately, it's not a straightforward area, an answer. So it depends on the nature of the cost. So some of the setup costs, for example, for primary care colleagues, whilst it passes through the CCG are being paid for from national pots, but equally there are additional pots of money which we are going through a process of making submissions, which will then come through to the CCG. Further to that, we know that we've got part of the £150 million funding for 2.9 million for North and Waveney has come into our position, which will enable us to provide further support to primary care practices in delivery of the COVID vaccine.
Thank you. No doubt it will all be much clearer as we progress through the remainder of the year. And are you planning to show the vaccination expenditure as a separate line, or is that going to be morphed into the other bits?
It will show as part of table 4, which is the COVID costs, but just part of the setup of the vaccination. Because unfortunately, it's not particularly clear in the way the funding flows, so it's not like everything flows from the CCG. But the costs that do flow through the CCG, we'll make sure it's reported separately and clear for the committee. Okay,
thank you. So no questions for Emma. Thank you very much. Oh, hang on. Is Tony wanting to ask a question before?
Yeah, thank you, Doris. All the costs for COVID being picked up by the local CCG, or are they being picked up centrally? I'm thinking of the cost of staffing and all these extra sites that have been put in place. Who's picking the cost up for all these?
It depends on the actual site who's delivering them. So at the moment, the vaccination being delivered to frontline staff actually in provider settings are being incurred by the providers. So, for example, the Queen Elizabeth, Paget, and the NNA. But clearly, there are staff going into mass vaccination sites, going out as we move through the programme into care homes, etc. So where there are costs, we are going through the process at the moment of making bids, which will include those staff. When we've got final confirmation of the monies, I would anticipate that to come through the CCG, but to be funded.
And if I could just follow up with a very quick follow-up question. Obviously, a lot of these patients are having to be transported using the voluntary sector. Are we looking to reimburse the voluntary sector for this job?
I'd probably look to John for some support, if I may, please, on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, Tony. That I think, like with the flu vaccination campaign and other access for patients to primary care, that there's well established sources of support for transport for those patients that need it. So if like as much of this as possible is being done under those business as usual arrangements, and that does include voluntary sector in some cases, we've not had any of those organisations coming to us for extra funding. So at the moment, no, there's no expectation of that.
Well, if I could, again, Doris, if you bear with me a moment, I'll just come back quickly. We've got the Beccles, obviously, community transport here, and we have the Halesworth transport. No, they've just been expected to pick this up without any likelihood of getting funding from anywhere. I've just put some locality budget money in order to get them started. But it's going to be the ongoing cost of transporting patients, and we're looking at transferring in my area. I mean, it's over 38% of my population is over 65. A lot of them are a lot older than that, and they don't have transport. So we're having to transport these people, and some we're going to have to do by taxi because they can't travel in conventional minibuses. So it is going to be a problem. I think we need to look at this with some seriousness, Sean, if we can, but not obviously now, outside this meeting.
And then just I'm aware of a number of discussions about provision, certainly within that patch, South Waveney patch. So yeah, there's conversations going on outside, Tony, so I'm sure we can catch up on that separately.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks, John. Yeah, I think that's kind of important to pick up somewhere, and I'm sure it will be by somebody in the team. If there are no more other questions for Emma, we'll let her go to her next meeting. That's great. Thank you very much, Emma.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Right, we'll go back to item 4, which is the minutes. Are there any accuracy that anybody wants to raise? And is there any matters arising that's not in the agenda anywhere else? I think most items are recurring, so so the minutes can be approved for signature. Onto the action log. We've got most of the items are now closed, and I think the prescribing report about the chronic pain slide deck was actually shared earlier on this week, so I think that can also be closed. So I think all the actions are closed around, on the action log. On to the item 5 on the forward planner. Sadie, do you want to just have a quick talk about it?
Yes, of course, thank you. So same as the format as you'll have seen for previous months, the items highlighted in red are those that have been affected so far, with the notes captured underneath. For January, you'll see that the PCN Development report has been affected this month. We've got Kate coming later on in the agenda to talk about the plan for moving forward with the allocation of the PCN Development Funds for each of the 5 localities. And we were expecting a focused report from Great Yarmouth and Waveney again this month. We've now completed all 5 localities since we started meeting in the summer last year. We haven't got a focused report this month, and that is quite simply because the teams are all focused completely on standing up the vaccination programme in each of their PCNs. And that is pretty much the sole piece of work for PCNs at the moment. So I would imagine that will continue to be the case for the next couple of months at least going forward, but we'll keep including notes on the forward planner as we bring it each month.
Thanks, Sadie. I mean, that's totally understandable. I mean, that's a priority at the moment, to get the vaccination programme up and running and rolled out, and as many people as possible through it. So, yeah, keep up the good work, I think, you and your team, for all at the CCG, who's trying to keep the moving beast, I think it is. On to the risk register. I think that we probably need to just caveat that I think it's the same issue in terms of, you know, staff bandwidth and timing, that there is probably a bit of refining that needs doing at some point.
Very much so. Thank you, Doris. Hein has very helpfully provided some comments to us already on the risk register. And you'll see this month that we had Jason very kindly provided the front sheet for it in the same style that is reported to the Finance Committee. And I've got a lesson in how to do it myself with him coming up in the next week or two. You'll notice that there are a couple of errors in the reporting where the scores don't match up, and I think that I'd like to apologise to the committee for that, but it is entirely for the reasons you said, Doris. It was bandwidth and things being done individually by colleagues and kind of not having the normal coordination that we would put in place. And I think again that bandwidth issue is going to be with us for certainly the next month and possibly longer. We will continue to seek to do our best on updating the risk register, but it may well be that there are, you know, it's not as full an update and hasn't had all of the reviews done that we might want or expect. And obviously it's up to you. We can continue to bring it and talk to it each month, or we can hold it back until we've got a bit more time to focus on doing things that we've talked about in the committee members in previous committees, and I'll leave that to you to guide us on that. In terms of the updates, you'll see in the main body of the risk register that the risks that have been updated are highlighted in red. We have had a suggestion as well from Hein that we include a COVID vaccination programme risk for primary care. And I think that I would certainly support that. It is an incredibly large programme. The practices are doing a fantastic job in responding to this, working together in their PCN groupings. But I think we shouldn't underestimate the bandwidth that's using up for them and the impact that it's having for them on their normal business. So I don't have any other comments to make on it, but along with colleagues, CCG colleagues that are on the meeting, very happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions for Sadie? John?
Or a comment, I suppose. First of all, I think it's really helpful to see that summary, because it does just focus us in on the red risks. And in line with that, just wondering if, in terms of managing workload in future meetings, we just have the detail on the red risks, but maybe that detail is updated, because I'm conscious the LD, it looks like it's about 3 months old in terms of the comment, but that's a red risk. So I wonder whether we can just focus on those couple of red risks and just keep those updated as we go, possibly.
Yeah, I would agree with John, and actually, and also the COVID risk, the COVID vaccination programme. I think if we concentrate on the high risk areas, just to manage, you know, workflow, and as a committee monitor the really high risk, and accept that some of the other risks, you know, I'm sure as an executive team you are keeping it under review and monitored, but let's not create work where, and obviously if something moves into high risk, then you will just bring it to our attention. But is that a sort of workable way forward for staff and committee members? Hein?
So I agree, it's a very pragmatic proposal. I would just put that caveat or that point on the page because it's a document that's accessible for a wider audience so that people are clear what has been updated and what not.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that. We've had the finance report. We're now on to the item 8, which is the terms of reference. Is Amanda joining us for this one?
I have to check with Sarah.
We're probably a bit ahead of time, so
Yeah.
I have her for 13:55.
okay, so she'll be be with us in a couple of minutes. Shall we take the prescribing report, seeing that Michael's with us?
Okay.
So we jump to item 10 and we'll come back to 8.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I'll take the paper as read, but I will just do a few highlights, things that are new this month. Our position in terms of regional performance did slip a bit, so we're moved from 5th highest spenders to 3rd highest spenders in terms of net ingredient cost per astro PU. And looking at spread across the patch, that seems to be driven by cost increases, particularly in South Norfolk, North Norfolk and West Norfolk in terms of year-on-year growth. And then we look at the individual drugs, which are, there's the usual offenders, which usual drugs, I shouldn't call them offenders, sorry. Emma highlighted previously. So sertraline, which is the drug for anxiety, which is very expensive at the moment due to national shortages. We've done some mitigation there. We've sent around some guidance, which we've agreed with GPs that other drugs should be used first line because it was recommended first line by NICE in 2009 on the basis that it was the most cost effective choice. Certainly isn't cost effective anymore. So we're recommending other drugs in the same class do exactly the same thing. And the GPs are happy with that. Having said that, the price has now started to drop now that we've done that, but it's still very high compared to other drugs. Other drugs new in this month, noticeably paracetamol. There's a £272,000 cost increase year on year based on not much change on volume. So that's just been a pure cost increase. And something that's a double-edged sword, we've got a £259,000 cost pressure. This is pretty much mostly in October of influenza vaccine, but that's all cross-charged because we don't hold the budget for that, but that's a good thing that we spent more money on influenza vaccine. And another new thing this month, I previously talked about Priodel lithium cost pressures due to some possible manipulation of the market by a company that had bought a cheap brand and an expensive brand of lithium and their intention to discontinue the cheap brand. Competitions and Markets Authority have essentially done a deal with them that means the price will go up on the cheaper brand and they'll keep it on the market because it was going to cause possibly some harm to patients trying to switch people to a different product because the therapeutic window is quite tight on those products and that can cause toxicity or lack of effectiveness in switching brands. And that's going to be about £110,000 a year for us looking at that going forward if the price stays the same, that is. Our dependence forming medicines, performance is okay on those apart from the hypnotics and anxiolytics. We've got another meeting of our dependence forming medicines group coming up later this month. And we're hoping to target some practices with some support, although that's quite difficult at the moment, as has previously been highlighted in terms of bandwidth, in terms of what support we can offer and what practices can practically do at the moment. So we'll just work on some top line actions and recommendations for that. Antibiotic prescribing. The CCG is only just above national on the broad spectrum and below on volume. As per previously reported, there has been a slight increase in broad spectrum, and we've agreed a letter to go out to those practices just to encourage them to point out where they are in terms of national performance, where they should be, and some actions that we'd like them to take, and the fact that they can do the audit and be funded for it if they sign up to the prescribing quality scheme. This month, I've also just highlighted some electronic prescription service, which I've highlighted how that works in section 5. And it is essentially something that is useful for patients, so they can request a repeat prescription by whatever method.
A participant has joined the meeting.
Either online or various other methods, and can have it sent to whichever pharmacy they wish. Dispensing doctors, they're not patients, if they're with a dispensing doctor, generally they'll pick it up from the dispensing practice, but in terms of patient choice, some patients may prefer or find it more convenient to pick up from pharmacies, perhaps near where they work. We do have a few practices that have yet to enable electronic prescription service, and we've agreed that we'll write to them, gently nudging them that they do need to sign up to that. It is essentially part of the contract and an expectation that we would have, that patients would be able to choose. And if the practices are offering a good service, then there's little reason for patients to stop using the practice effectively. But it is a real benefit in terms of making it harder for patients to run out of their medicines, particularly if they're set up on what's called electronic repeat dispensing, where their repeat templates just drop down into the pharmacy about 7 days before their next prescription is due. And that means that those patients who panic on a Friday afternoon and want an urgent prescription, for example, for inhalers for asthma, etc., are less likely to have to do that if they've been set up with a regular repeat. And it also means that pharmacies are contractually obliged to ensure that patients aren't getting medicines they don't need. They are expected to open the bag, and that is part of and patients can hand things back at the pharmacy if that's the way it's done. And they're put there, there's no cost to the NHS for that. So Appendix 1 just highlights the percentages of EPS items in reverse order. So you can see Norfolk and Waveney, its performance it's relatively low in terms of national, and you can see that there are some practices that have very little, and that's largely because they're not signed up, or patients choose not to engage with it for whatever reason. That's my report this month. Any suggestions for any highlights for next month? Gratefully received, but any questions, comments, welcomed.
Thanks, Michael. Karen?
Thanks, Michael. That's a really interesting report. I'm just keen to understand a little bit around the paracetamol prescribing, because we did do quite a lot of work over encouraging people to buy over the counter. Have we made any further progress, or do we need to remind people, or do you think it's COVID related?
Not in the last year, we haven't. In the early days, which is probably about 3 years ago, we made significant inroads in promoting the idea of self-care and setting some targets for GPs to encourage to reduce appropriately the use of self-care, and encouraging patients to purchase their own items. So, for instance, a pack of 32 paracetamol, I think, cost the NHS 91p just for the pure reimbursement cost. Obviously, there's other fees on top of that, but patients could buy those from a supermarket for 32 pence, and it would be better use of NHS resources if a lot of patients who can afford to do that did that. Having said that, there are some patients who take 2-4 times a day regularly for chronic pain, and generally that's a good thing, because the alternative is the GP prescribes something much stronger, which might include an opiate, and that would not be a good thing. So we're less worried about the chronic pain usage, but short courses, I mean, they shouldn't really be prescribed on the NHS except in very limited circumstances where GPs do have discretion to prescribe whatever's needed. But we haven't been pushing the idea of self-care this year. Certainly it's something we've thought about for the prescribing quality scheme for next year, but we may launch that later in the year after the initial COVID pressures are over. We've got a meeting with I think Sadie to discuss that tomorrow, in fact, about what we can and we can reasonably expect practices to deal with at the moment or in the near future.
Thank you, Michael. That's helpful. I do have an additional question, Chair, for Michael, and it's really around the antimicrobial prescribing. We've worked incredibly hard over the years, and I'm always sort of fearful when we've been all completely consumed by COVID-19, but obviously it's something that's quite dear to my heart and others. And I'd be really keen not to lose the traction and the progress we've made across the system in terms of the prescribing. Do we feel we've seen an increase with remote working? And is there anything more that we can do?
Simple answer to that is yes. I think I think we've mentioned this before, actually, when I did a theme on it, that the threshold at which you might prescribe an antibiotic it's more of a grey area when you're doing remote consultations, and you might feel it more appropriate to give than not give in those circumstances. Certainly, some practices have increased their use of broad spectrum antibiotics, which might be don't understand necessarily the reasons for that, but if they're not adhering to formulary, for instance, then we'd encourage them to audit themselves against formulary. But yes, antibiotic prescribing has broadly gone up a small amount during COVID, and I think that is remote working has definitely contributed to that, where patients can't get a thorough examination.
Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Are there any other questions for Michael? John?
Thank you. Michael, just interested, ignorant question, I'm sure, but electronic repeat dispensing and that process to support patients, how does that sit alongside the prescription ordering direct service, the POD service, or are they completely different things? Is there overlap there?
There's not overlap. So POD are actually promoting that to patients if they're on a stable prescription, and instead of them ordering every month, they are getting them set up a consent to become part of electronic repeat dispensing. So over time, some of the POD workload will decrease appropriately. You have to explain quite carefully how it works, because it's slightly revolutionary, really. I mean, so normally patient orders prescription, goes and collects it from the doctor's surgery, although maybe goes straight to the pharmacy. And this way, it's kind of automatic. But, patients just need to understand how it works, and the fact that if they run out of their medicine and they're away from home, they can actually go to a nearby pharmacy and they can call down the repeat in the nearby pharmacy. So if we explain all those benefits to patients, that will reduce pressures on the on stretched GP practices, even pharmacies, and out of hours A&E, because of the lack of need for urgent prescriptions. So so POD are promoting it. It's instead of, and once you're on it, it can be instead of POD. Patients can still contact POD if they need to, and we're encouraging uptake. During the first wave of POD, there was a national push to get more and more patients onto electronic repeat dispensing, because that would even out the demand. So patients stockpiling became unnecessary, because they would just get their prescriptions fall down into the pharmacy as they were needed, rather than have a huge peak in demand, which would cause shortages.
Okay,
so
thank you.
Two separate things, but they do run alongside, and they do overlap a bit.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay.
Any other questions from Michael? No. I just had a question really in correlation between, just looking at the Appendix 2, where you've got the different practices and the take-up rate for the electronic prescribing. You go from sort of obviously people not signed up to some practices where it's a really high uptake. Is there a correlation between prescribing practices and non-prescribing practices in terms of where they sit on that table?
You will find the ones at the bottom tend to be more dispensing practices, because EPS items only go to pharmacies. So if they're a high dispensing practice, as a lot of those are, for instance, Litcham or Grimston, there aren't nearby pharmacies. So you would expect most patients to collect it from the dispensing doctor's practice, but you would expect patient choice to mean that some patients might want to collect from wherever they work, Swaffham or Kings Lynn. So you wouldn't expect it to be zero. So what I'm saying is, yes, dispensing practices tend to be quite low, but that's for the reason that patients collect them from their dispensing doctors, which is absolutely fine, but you would expect to see some transfer of electronic repeat prescriptions to pharmacies. So EPS, electronic prescription service, doesn't work with dispensing doctors. They would have to buy a pharmacy system, and there's no incentive for them to do that. So when they prescribe something and it prints out in the dispensary, or however they do it in the practice, that is effectively going via electronic prescription, but it's not going via the spine to a pharmacy. So it's just a different way of doing it. What I can do is perhaps for next month I can correlate to percentage dispensing patients and do a little graph, or I can send that round after the meeting, and you can see what the correlation is. You will find dispensing doctors tend to be the lower end.
Yeah, so is there a sort of a benchmark that you would normally expect if it was being used? I mean,
yeah,
I get it's more convenient because there isn't a pharmacy nearby, but just
well,
some
I've
of the
highlighted Sol Bay. Sol Bay is national average, so 68% of prescriptions going as EPS is national average, but doesn't take account of the fact that obviously Norfolk is a bit more rural than other parts of the country. So you would expect even practices that have high dispensing number of patients for 5 or 10% of their patients to choose to get it electronically from a pharmacy where they work, or from a national internet pharmacy.
Okay, thank you.
We wouldn't expect it to be zero. Sorry.
Yeah, Parbeen, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Doris. It was just covering off the electronic prescribing. Unfortunately, there is a loophole in the contract, so practices that are currently signed up to electronic prescribing can't come off it. But those that are currently not, there's no statutory requirement for them to join the scheme. I do understand nationally there may be a change next year to the contract, but at the moment, the plan is, as Michael said earlier on, is a gentle letter to try and persuade them to join the scheme. So once they join, they can't come off, but at the moment there's a loophole in the national contract.
Okay.
Thank you.
Watch this space, I think, isn't it? Thank you. If there's no other questions, we'll move back to the terms of reference. I think Amanda has joined us, although she might have connection problems, but we can give it a go and see if it works. Amanda, are you with us?
Yes, hello, Chair. Thank you. Sorry, I am having a few technical issues this end, so hopefully it lasts and I can take you through the paper. This paper is to present the committee's terms of reference. It's good practice to review the terms of reference annually. The committee has obviously been in place for 9 months now, so we're approaching that time. Just by way of background, I wanted just to go through and confirm that the terms of reference are set out in the CCG's constitution. The constitution was developed with the support of a working group made up of a number of key stakeholders. It was supported by NHS England, and it was approved by the governing body in April 2020. The Primary Care Commissioning Committee is one of the 3 committees that terms of reference are contained in the Constitution. So the terms of reference are obviously a key document that set out the membership, the quorum, the remit, and key items as to how the committee itself runs. There isn't really very much else that I particularly wanted to say about it, apart from at this moment, there is no proposal to make any changes unless there are any issues that have been identified by committee members that they would like to see addressed in order to make the committee more efficient.
Parbeen?
Thank you, Doris. Apologies, Amanda, you may have not seen this. So TAA, our external auditors have made a recommendation that the Primary Care Committee's terms of reference are explicit in terms of the management of primary care delegated commissioning risks. And we did say as part of our management response that we would reflect their recommendation in the annual update and review of the terms of reference of the Primary Care Commissioning Committee. So now would be probably timely to implement that when the committee manages the primary care risks and receive those at every meeting. They just want it more explicit in the terms of reference.
And that would be fine to make that amendment if the committee is happy to include that. One of the things that I should have are based on the model terms of reference produced by NHS England, but it can be adapted for local use and to make it more appropriate locally. So yes, that would be fine to include that.
Kathy?
When we reviewed the terms of reference for the Quality and Performance Committee, we changed the wording regarding the management of quality, and we stated now explicitly that quality for primary care came under this committee, but if there was anything to do with system quality, it would go to the Quality and Performance Committee. And I think we did say that we needed to look at the terms of reference to ensure that that was reflected in the Primary Care Committee's terms of reference.
Yeah, we did have that discussion. Thanks for reminding me, Kathy. Are there any other comments from anybody? John?
I'm sorry, it's a really, really minor point, but if we are changing the terms of reference, just the title of the Deputy CFO is not current. So I'll just provide Amanda the revised title for the role occupied by Jason.
Thanks. I think there has been sort of ongoing debate or questioning for the LMC in terms of clarifying membership of the committee because it's about voting members and non-voting members. And I think if we are seeing we're making the couple of changes in terms of the quality and also the audit issue, maybe we can just add, under the membership, just, have a bit of a title to go voting members and non-voting members. And then that's much easier then to be reflected in the minutes when we do the people who are attending as to which category they sit under. So it's clear to everybody. I think we all know whether we are voting or non-voting members, but that might address one of the recurrent niggles that we have from the LMC. So are there any other comments from anybody?
Chair, if I could just mention if just about the process then for making the amendments to the terms of reference, that the committees are also being asked for any changes to their terms of reference. They will then be presented along with any changes to the constitution to the governing body. And once we have agreed the draft changes to the constitution, they'll be submitted to NHS England for approval. And then they will be, take effect after that point.
Thanks, Amanda. So can Tony, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, I was. Thank you, Doris. I was having a look through the makeup of the committee, the voting members. I'm here as a non-voting member. I understand that, and I'm trying to work out in my mind where these representatives are coming from, because at the moment I can see it's very NHS centric, which is understandable, but I'm looking to see how much representation Great Yarmouth and Waveney has, and I can only see one position. Now, I may be wrong, so I stand to be corrected if that's the case, but is that so?
Well, in the part one, both yourself and Health Watch Suffolk are invitees to the meeting.
Yeah.
To try and cover off the Waveney representation point.
But we don't vote.
No, because the only voting members are there are basically 4 voting members.
How many?
Sorry, there are four voting members. There's myself, Hein as the chair of the Finance Committee, John or his deputy, and Kathy, who is the registered nurse on the governing body. So it's all governing body members who have the voting members.
Yeah, okay, understand now. Thank you, Doris.
It's okay. Did you want to come in, John?
I was just going to make the point, Doris, that all 4 of us as voting members, our remit covers Norfolk and Waveney. So we have responsibilities for Waveney as much as we do for North Norfolk, South Norfolk, everywhere else.
Yeah. That's great. So Amanda, can we leave it, maybe once you've drafted the amendments, will there be time to bring it back to the February committee meeting, or does it have to go to governing body in January?
She's lost again, sorry.
I'll pick this up with Amanda offline, maybe, and if necessary, email people as to the next point, way forward. John?
I was just going to say, Doris, it's lined up to go to the governing body in March, I believe.
Right, so we have time to come back next month just to be sure that everybody's happy with the wording and the changes before it goes to the governing body in March. Great, thank you very much. I think that's the terms of reference finished. I see that Katie has joined us as well. So Katie, welcome. Do you want to take us through the item 9 on PCN development and anything else you want to tell us about? I think you have a presentation for us.
Yeah, that's right. Hi, Doris. Hello, everyone. Yeah, if the presentation can be shared on the screen, that would be great, please, if that's possible. I'm not sure, is it Sarah that's driving the slides?
Yes, I am just trying to get them for you.
I hope it's okay with the committee that this is going to be a very high level update on primary care network development. Okay, so just to recap, if we move to the second slide, you know, we're, yeah, as you've discussed, as everyone will be very well aware, we're working in an extraordinary time right now, and you know, our general practice, our primary care networks have had to face the biggest challenge I think the NHS has ever had to face. And consequently, because of the pandemic, resources are stretched. And our workforce have been working full pelt since the first outbreak. And that inevitably will have knock-on effects on business as usual services and pieces of work that are considered developmental and transformational. But that's not to say that throughout the pandemic, there has been points in throughout the year where our PCNs have been able to gather stock on what's worked well and how they've responded to the pandemic, and particularly how they've reverted to their PCNs and working within their groupings with neighbouring practices in response to managing local outbreaks. And there has been flexibility throughout the year, directed by NHS England and supported by the RCGP and local medical committees, where general practice has been able to pause or perhaps postpone pieces of work in order to focus on the immediate task at hand. During October, we were at a point where our PCNs were gearing back up to focus on delivering the new specifications as part of the enhanced service for PCN development. And those specifications were structured medication reviews and medicines optimization, enhanced health and care homes, and early cancer diagnosis. And indeed, a lot of our PCNs have made significant headway on those key areas, particularly around putting in place multidisciplinary teams with care home partners to focus on their complex patients within care homes. And our PCNs have been looking at early cancer diagnosis in the context of the pandemic and the impact that has had on patients presenting with early symptoms of cancer. And within the DES for PCN development, there's opportunities for PCNs to recruit to the additional role reimbursement scheme and utilise some of those roles to support some of the key strategic priorities this year, such as the rollout of the flu vaccination programme, and since November really, the COVID vaccination programme. So on the next slide, we've got an update on our financial position for PCN Development Funding. And hopefully committee members will remember we had significant carryover from 2019-20. And this year we had £792,000 allocated to Norfolk and Waveney system for PCN developments. We've been advised that both these sums need to be allocated and spent by the end of the financial year, which in the context of, the current context, as I've described, is going to be a huge challenge because we're in January now. And it's a significant chunk of money to focus on development and transformational pieces of work. Nevertheless, we have conveyed to our locality teams and the PCNs that these pots of money have been allocated and that PCNs should do their very best to develop their plans for utilising this money within the parameters of the DES programme. And so the next slide just shows a very high level process which the CCG PCN Development Steering Group developed, just to clarify the steps that we would expect PCNs to go through in order to access that funding. And this is the proposal that we're bringing to Primary Care Committee today for discussion and hopefully for approval. But as I said, it's very high level and we've tried to make the process as streamlined as possible for our PCNs. So the first step would be to revise existing plans, so the 1920 plans, if that's appropriate. Some of those plans are actually, for some localities, for some PCNs, still stand and they don't need revising, but some areas, given the context we're working in, are wanting to refresh those plans. We've also asked that any spend to date is accurately invoiced and submitted to the CCG. Step 2 would then to be submit further plans for the 2021 monies and to make sure that reference is given back to the maturity matrix and the PCN prospectus. And we're also asking our PCNs to submit a revised position against the maturity matrix. We've conveyed this step process to our locality teams to ask them to discuss with their PCNs first-hand whether they feel that this is an appropriate ask given the pressures that they're currently facing to deliver the COVID vaccination programme and business as usual. And North Norfolk Primary Care have submitted to us a plan in response. So the next slide just gives you, it's a snippet really from their plan. You can see it's very, very high level, but it does the job in terms of describes how they would meet the PCN requirements of the prospectus and the maturity matrix under the community teams development domain within the prospectus. So very high level, very easy to read format. I quite like this and I hope committee members think that this is acceptable given all that I've just talked about. So in terms of next steps, so I'm asking for approval from the PCC for this high level process and that we could set the PCNs in train to revise their plans with a similar format for submission to the PCC. We're asking our PCNs to update their position on the maturity matrix, and for invoices, as I said, to come in for against the 1920 monies. And our intention would be to bring a further update to the next Primary Care Committee meeting. So thank you very much. If there's any questions, thank you, Sarah, for the slides.
Thanks, Kate. Are there any questions on what Kate's just shared with us? John?
I suppose it's probably more a comment than a question. I suppose to some extent we're between a rock and a hard place here, aren't we? The risk is that if we don't commit and spend the money, well, then it might, I guess, be reclaimed by NHS England, who provided it to us in the first place. Equally, there's clear, huge priorities for primary care on a day-to-day basis around COVID vaccinations and everything else. And also, we need to make sure we get value for money for whatever it is that we do. So I suppose I would rather be in the camp of, if necessary, working with the team to try and find ways of lengthening out the process so we can do it at a more appropriate time for primary care and make sure we get value for money. So I'm more than happy to have those conversations outside of the meeting if that's helpful.
Thank you, John.
Fine.
Very welcome.
Yeah, I had a similar comment around concern about value for money as John has. Maybe one point of clarification. I gather the instructions are to attribute monies and ideally spend. So what does exactly attribute mean? Is that you sort of come up with this high level plan where you want to spend it, but you have another 12 months to work out the details? Can you clarify, Kate?
Maybe perhaps I was looking for a bit of direction from finance colleagues. Previously, we've been able to attribute plans and amounts per PCN, and we've been able to re-provide it the next year. Before this latest peak in our pandemic, certainly the direction from finance was it all has to be spent by the end of this financial year and out of our accounts. But very much welcoming John's comments just then. If there's a way that we could lengthen the process to ensure value for money, which of course we would ensure value for money anyway against our high level plans. But if we had a bit more grace, if that's possible, to look at our plans in detail, that would be really welcome.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, so maybe there's a conversation to be had with the higher lords and NHS around value for money, given everything else that's on the go. But I think that your comments reflected that already. So.
James, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I wondered if I'd partly question, partly comment really, which is this isn't the first time NHS England have sort of done something which feels a little bit artificial. I just wonder if the committee, given the respect that it's got, could ask for an explanation for NHS England to explain their rationale, because it is a time of unprecedented change. Business as normal is intended to return, and it would be a shame if funds earmarked weren't available or had to be rushed simply because of a relatively artificial deadline. It is a constraint that the PCNs are having to work to. I think we've heard that there's a really good solution in place, but it does feel to me that we could ask for NHS England's explanation as to why they've placed colleagues under pressure at an already difficult time. I wondered if that would be possible.
Fiona, do you want to come in on this one? I'm not sure.
I think she's still struggling with tech issues.
Yeah. John.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I understand James's point and linking with Hein's point. If we have the conversation offline with Kate and Sadie, and then, if necessary, I'll go back to the NHS England finance team, and then, depending on the outcome, we can always ask Doris to maybe intervene on behalf of the committee. But I would sincerely hope that we'll be able to sort it.
Yeah, because I mean, historically, you know, there's always been issues when people have got to come up with schemes to spend money. It doesn't necessarily is the most efficient use when actually people have more time to develop workable solutions. So it would be good if that conversation can be had. And so in the interim, Kate, do you need can we defer this for a couple of weeks?
Well, I think if the committee, it would be helpful to understand if you approve of the sort of the high level process that we're asking the PCNs to go through. And I think we ought to still ask them for that. But at the same time, also need to have the conversation around the finance, which I think would very much help in terms of just the current pressure that primary care is facing, and just having the headspace to be able to work up those plans, even if they are high level.
I mean, I don't have a problem personally with the high level, given the where we are, but I would like a conversation, you know, to with NHSE and I to say, well, actually, is this really realistic? I welcome other people's thoughts. Tony?
Thank you, Doris. I completely concur with everything that's been said. I think what James has said and what you have said is absolute common sense. I think whoever the person is who's expecting this to be done quickly may not be fully aware there's a pandemic going on and GP practices and PCNs are under tremendous pressure. They may be sitting at home in front of the television and just looking occasionally at their computers. I don't know. I'm being a bit flippant, I'm sorry, but at least you're smiling. But I mean, it seems ridiculous. You want value for money and you want the PCNs to be able to benefit from what they can gain from this training and extra work. So it needs a bit of common sense, and I think yourself and one or two others around the table here, I'm sure you can bring a little bit of pressure to bear.
Okay, thank you. Kathy?
I guess the approach that I favour is of agreeing today the high level approach, but for the conversations at a local level, first off, to think about how we can attribute the money in the longer term would be the most effective way. Having worked at the kind of NHSEI level, there's often a pressure to say, okay, if this system can't spend the money, how can we give it to another one? Because they are under pressures of their own, I guess, politically. So it almost seems to me if we can come up with a solution locally, that would be my preferred option, really, before taking this back to NHSEI. That's my feeling.
John Webster?
Yeah, I just want to agree with Kathy. I mean, I think I agree with everything that's been said in relation to timescales and existing pressure. But in my experience, if we can go with a bit of a firmer plan to NHS England to extend that timeline, I think that would be sensible. And I think it's probably just building on what you've presented, Kate, but maybe with a bit more detail over an agreed timescale to present that, rather than just saying give us a bit longer, I think I'd suggest.
So have we got the way forward? Hein, are you in agreement with agreeing with it, sort of the general outline, but to push a wee bit?
Yeah, I think the guidance from Kathy and John Webster makes a lot of sense. I think it makes for a much more receptive audience at the NHSE. But then you can make the argument if they cherish value for money, which I'm sure they do, they hopefully are inclined to support requests for a bit more time.
Okay, so I think we are in principle in agreement with the sort of high level program that you've outlined, but we want to push back a bit. Okay. And before I let you go, Kate, I gather a happy event is about to happen. So I want to wish you the very best from all of us, and we look forward to seeing you again when life returns to slightly a new normal for you. So congratulations, and we look forward to having some good news.
That's really kind. Thank you all. Bye now.
Bye. We've done item 10, and so we can now go on to item 11, the learning disability and autism briefing. Parveen, are you taking us through this?
I am. Thank you, Doris. I'll take the paper as read and just go through some key highlights. As you can see from the performance for Q2 compared to the previous time, the same time last year, we are well behind the 67% target that's set for us as a CCG. On a positive note, on the latest national letter that came out from NHC was around priorities during the COVID vaccination programme, LD health checks is still very much there on the agenda. We are still struggling with obviously practice and bandwidth, not just within the CCG's delegated commissioning team, but also within localities and practice in terms of trying to increase the take-up of LD health checks. As you will see from the risk register and response to Heinz, Sadie, as part of the 7 priorities for the primary care support funding, LD health checks is again very much an area that we've asked practices to focus on. And some practices are really going out and above and trying. I mean, I was speaking to Attleborough this morning, and they've got 100 patients on their LD register, and they've made numerous contacts and attempts to encourage patients to undertake the health checks. And they've had a response back of 3 have agreed to undergo a health check. It doesn't help that they've had shielding letters basically asking them not to go anywhere, and that's frightened patients at the same time. So we are vastly behind trajectory, and we're trying to think of different ways of what we can try and encourage practices and patients to increase that target. In terms of the BAME exemplar bid, the outreach worker commenced this week, and I understand, James, they're going to start at your practice in terms of supporting and identifying BAME LD patients that haven't undergone a health check and encourage them to undergo a health check. So that should help in terms of helping turn around the performance. The peripatetic team, which again, the aim of that is a nurse and 2 HCAs will start on the 22nd of February. And the aim is that they will work in hotspot areas where we were way behind the trajectory. But again, there's a significant risk because they start on the 22nd of February. That's the earliest we can get them into post. It doesn't leave us a lot of recovery time between then and the 31st of March before the end of the year. And the app, in terms of the IT app that we're working on, that's been placed on hold on at the moment because we just don't have the resources and capacity to work on that at the moment during COVID. Happy to take any questions. I'm sorry to get the gloomy picture at the moment.
Thanks, Parveen.
I can add a little bit about the outreach work if you like, just to add a bit of flesh to that. So very interesting project. So we're delighted to be asked to be involved. So we are talking with the outreach worker. It's going to be based here, working on lists, and it's about trying to get the conversation going so that we become more relevant and more direct, so that it sort of we end the cycle of offer and refusal, and we become more integrated, so that the patients see it as part of an essential service. So we're really looking forward to developing and widening the context of that work, even with the things that are going. So a brilliant project, Parveen, and congratulations to the CCG for being involved or winning it, I understand. So
thank you. Thank you.
I mean, for me, there's a sort of a question in my mind whether there is sort of additional stigma in the BAME community with learning difficulties, and whether, you know, and would this project help in reducing stigma to encourage people to actually come forward?
it's definitely one of the aims of the health promotion work that the health outreach worker will do. So just before, I think it was early September, I met with the Hindu community for Norfolk and Waveney, and they very much said it is quite a stigma. They know people in the community that have got learning disabilities, but it's a bit of a stigma in terms of saying it outly that their child or their relative has an LD. So they've agreed to help promote the work that the CCC is doing, but unfortunately at the moment it's virtually because a lot of the temples and things are closed down where we could go in and work with those communities, but the offer's certainly there when COVID restrictions are lifted. They're quite happy for us to come in and engage with their temple community to try and talk about health checks more widely, but at the moment we have sent them a newsletter virtually that they can share with their online community.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Parveen? John?
Thank you. Just a couple of things, Parveen, I suppose. One is, I know that LD health checks is featured as a key issue, hasn't it, in the publications over the last month or two from NHS England. Have we asked practice for plans as to how they hope to increase the uptake of LD health checks, or was it just a question of asking numbers? And also recognising the issue that you've said about all the messages are to stay at home. People will be worried about going out for anything, including going to a GP practice for a health check. So are there other remote solutions that can at least deliver some assurance on the health of patients with learning disabilities?
Yeah. The second part of your question, John, so NHS England have relaxed the physical elements of the health check, so where it's clinically safe to do so, they can actually carry out both LD and SMI health checks remotely. So a lot of practice are taking their opportunity to try and engage with patients, but they're having difficulty in terms of getting access and patients contacting them. So there is an opportunity, and we are pushing that to say that we can do virtually. As of December, just before Christmas, we changed the reporting template. So on the original 7 priorities, it was just how many health checks have you done and how many you're going to do. And we were getting quite ambiguous answers where the BI team couldn't break that down to any meaningful data. So we've changed it into a spreadsheet to say, how many do you have on the register? How many have you completed? And what is your trajectory and plans for the next month to complete? So hopefully our own internal BI team then can produce a trajectory for me.
Are there any other questions, comments? No. Thank you very much, Parveen, for that update.
Thank you, John.
That's the last item on the agenda. I have not been made aware of any questions from the public, so there's nothing on item 12. Is there any other business from anybody? No, thank you very much.